You're listening to 88.7 WLUW Chicago Sound Alliance, broadcasting from the campus of Loyola University. It's live from the Heartland, featuring hosts Michael James, Katy, Hogan, and Thom Clark. On today's show, we'll be having conversations with multiple activists, artists, and filmmakers. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Live from the Heartland. It's Michael James with Thom Clark and Katy Hogan. We've got a whole bunch of people here for you to learn a little bit from. We're going to have Jim MacKenzie, a great friend and a climate activist, Eve Brownstone, and David Gista talking about community sculpture. We'll have the film producer Harvey Moshmann on the Eastland, Chicago's Deadliest Day, and Judith Helfand and Fenell Doremus, filmmakers of Cooked, Survival by Zip Code. Okay, everybody, let's roll.
Nice going, Michael. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, folks.
So I am so thrilled, so thrilled that the activists, the Audubon Society, the hedge guarders, the local park council,
Whole lot of people came together and told the city and told promoters, no, you cannot have your festival at Montrose Beach. No,
yes!
50,000 youth running around Montrose Hill.
I love it.
Because
Plover power.
Not just plover power. It's also about people lining their pockets on public land.
But the plovers...
And closing down that whole space for 5 days, 6 days in order to prepare and clean up. It's crazy.
But the plovers have hatched.
Yes, they have. And they've also laid some new eggs.
And plovers are a kind of bird, for those of you who have never heard of it before. The plovers have hatched.
This bodes well for the future of the Montrose Hedge, which has been under increasing pressure because of weekend special events on our public land. Even volunteers for the hedge have not been able to get to their parking places because of weekend events. So it's really a great victory to re-examine how our park district land is used.
Yep. Okay, we had an outrage this week. Another
I know who we ought to be locking up and sending back home.
Yeah.
And it's a
Enough
male
said, baby.
gender
You
pronoun.
think Queens wants them?
Say what?
You think Queens would want
I
them?
doubt it. Yeah, enough said about that. Another laudable moment, another really happy thing. Well, sort of. Quick and great response by activists, immigration lawyers, and Jan Schakowsky, our congresswoman, this week allowed 3 detained children at O'Hare to go home with their mom, although it took about 10 or 12 hours. Thank you, and nice work, everyone.
Onward.
Yeah. Be watchful of ICE activity in your block. If you see something, call 773-917-4505. That's Protect RP, and we are continuing to keep an eye out for our neighbors.
773-917-4505.
We have all been invited to a special announcement this week on Wednesday the 24th between 9 and 9:15 down at City Hall. The Chicago Affordable Housing Policy is going to be announced by the Chicago Housing Initiative. Really important initiative with the new administration. It's a good new line in the sand about what ought to be happening with affordable housing in the city.
Along those lines, also on Wednesday evening is the final of the 4 sessions that the Chicago Police Department has been doing around the consent decree. These are required meetings, and this week's is going to be at Warren Park at 6 p.m. Be there or be square. We've got to keep the pressure on.
Don't forget about Chalk Howard Street. This will be a great event, first time in the neighborhood, from 11 to 8 today along Howard Street. Great art.
Also today is St. Nicholas Rummage Sale ongoing until 3 p.m. That's at Ridge and something.
Just south of Main Street in
There you
Evanston,
go.
And it's a great place for bargains. And great food, phenomenal food. Good luck to those workers on today's heat.
Yeah,
It will be cooling down later in the day.
Talking about heat, next week is Bughouse Square Debates.
Yeah.
2 to 4, we're thinking of studs.
That's some hot
12
stuff.
to 4.
12 to 4, and we're thinking of studs and Ida as we mark another anniversary. I forget which one this is, but it's been going on for decades. And turn out and speak your mind, because we need more of that these days.
Interesting to see the marking so completely of the moonshot this week, which was 50 years ago today.
Quite moving, actually.
Actually, yes. And
a time when we could be proud of our accomplishments.
Well, it's raised a lot of questions about
That
what we
too.
spend money on and how.
Yeah, I'm liking it better now than I did back then. Back then, I was pretty critical of how we spent the money.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Well, speaking of back then, my dude, you introduced me to a wonderful family early in our knowing each other, Michael, and that was the MacKenzie family that included Angus and our current guest, Jim, his brother. Angus wrote an incredible book called Secrets, The CIA's War at Home, which Jim unfortunately had to finish editing because of Angus's untimely death. We think so kindly and lovingly of that beautiful man right now. And welcome Jim, who has continued to be an activist and currently is coordinating 350.org in New Mexico. Welcome to Live from the Heartland, James.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Thom and Michael. I appreciate it. I'd love to be here.
Yeah. Let's start with what are you? What's the scene in New Mexico on climate change? And if you want to broaden it to what you see in Chicago this last few days, what are you thinking?
Well, New Mexico has a wonderful alliance of organizations, grassroots organizations working on climate, and we're making progress. In the 2019 state legislature, we passed something called the Energy Transition Act with the support of the governor and the Democratic majority, and this is going to transition New Mexico to 100% renewable electrical generation by the year 2045. This puts us on a par with just a few other states, Washington, Oregon, and California. This is a big deal. This was a lot of work over a long period of 3 or 4 years. We did this and we came together. So we're not resting on our laurels. We're moving forward. That's only the energy sector. Where New Mexico has increased its oil and gas production. We used to be 10th in the country. We're now 3rd in production, and it is a major problem. We need to keep it in the ground. The state doesn't understand that yet, so we've got a lot of work to do.
Given that you spent about a decade on the startup wind turbine manufacturing, what do you think are the most significant practices we as individuals and also in communities should be focusing on to address this man-made disaster?
Yeah, so climate is a man-made catastrophe running at us, and there are lots of things we can do. Individually, I think most of your listeners have got it already. We have changed our light bulbs in our house. We are consistently buying, if we're driving a car, we're buying cars that get a better gas mileage. We're trying everything we can to reduce our carbon footprint. Unfortunately, this goes beyond an individual solution. So what the real answer is for us to all use our political power, our God-given political power to move the country in the right direction. And that takes a sustained effort. And for those who are feeling overwhelmed by this disaster, I will be here to tell you that it's extremely therapeutic to work in the political sphere and be victorious. I mean, the plover speaks to me. I mean, we came together here in Chicago to make a statement about this bird is not just a little feathered friend. It's much more important than that,
Amen.
right? And there's a victory here.
Yeah,
so.
I'm glad you were here for it and staying so close that you could understand what it means.
Yes.
Jim, your brother's book was called Secrets, The CIA's War at Home. You also served in Vietnam, going back a few years now. What new perspectives did you get on the war that apply to today after editing your brother's book?
So the war was a very, as you can imagine, a formative experience for me. When I went to Vietnam, we were fighting for the freedom of the Vietnamese people. That's what we went there for. It didn't take long on the ground in Vietnam to see that was total BS. Mm-hmm. So there was a long path that led up to Vietnam. The Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers told us how that happened. And then Angus became a very successful investigative journalist and wrote this wonderful book that I was fortunate to be able to edit and publish with my mother after his passing. And his basic thesis was that the growth in the culture of secrecy in Washington was not, again, we were told this was to protect us from the Russians, right? No.
Apparently it didn't work.
No. The Russians could and can buy what secrets they need. There's always willing sellers. It's a very active market. So the secrets were to protect the politicians from the American public, keeping the mistakes and the guffaws and the outrage away from the American public. And that's the basic thesis of the book. And it goes into interesting, fascinating detail.
Let me just say that I remember when Angus was here, he's staying at my house, and he interviewed an FBI agent who was disenchanted and sharing the information about what was really going wrong. And that happened right over at Loyola University.
So does this week's alleged drone attack by Iran on a tanker ring any bells?
Well, of course it does. And this is
Gulf of Tonkin, anyone?
Yeah, exactly. So where is the truth? It's awfully hard to tell, and it's kind of a fool's errand trying to figure out what the truth is. What we know is what the big picture is, and what Secretary of State Bolton is interested in, et cetera, et cetera. So
he's not really the Secretary of State, right? Bolton?
No.
No, it's the Chief of War.
He's the Chief of War, right?
Thank you for correcting me.
No, I'm sorry. I wanted to know that I hadn't missed some news, some terrible news.
Well, there's another little sidelight, and I don't know. I wasn't there, but after I came back from Vietnam, I spent a couple of years doing draft information and helping young men, it was all men at that point, to avoid the draft. And when I hear our president, whose name shall not pass my lips,
another one,
talk about his
service, perhaps?
His failure to serve, it actually kind of resonates with me because he had shin splints, and that's okay with me. See, now I'm a veteran, so I have some authority on this subject. It's fine with me that he came up with this excuse not to go because he had shin splints. Because I was doing the same thing with young men in Beloit, Wisconsin, finding
Good point.
They had hangnails or they had shin splints or
bone spurs
or something, and it didn't matter what the reason. He didn't go, and that is good. Right?
Good point. Yeah.
So why didn't he learn from that? No, that's a topic for another show. But
yes, I can't get in the brain there. I don't know.
Do you think that the book Secrets, the CIA's War at Home, your brother's book, which you should own too, given that you finished it for him, has any lessons for us today?
Well, absolutely. Secrecy is a problem. Secrecy is an excuse to throttle democracy, and there was hope. Angus was hopeful that by delving into how dysfunctional secrecy is in a democracy, that there would be changes and improvements. And this was early in Clinton's first administration, and there was some hope until Bill got into trouble, and then everything became secret. So, I don't know what the lessons are, but it's still a major problem in this country, if not worse.
Indeed it is.
There have been times when I have cheered the current occupants' negative comments about our U.S. intelligence agency. Of course, he picks when he's going to use that intelligence or not. But this has also been going on for 50 years, cherry-picking the intelligence we get. So who are we to trust when it comes down to trying to figure out where the truth might be?
So, then this problem is compounded by the atrophy of the American press. There are only a few organizations that have the deep pockets. So there are wonderful blogs out there. There's good information on the internet, along with a lot of BS. But you have to look far and wide, and it's hard. It's hard to find trustful sources.
Jimmy Mack, James MacKenzie.
Yes.
We have so enjoyed your visit this week. Thanks for coming on the show while
Thanks
you're
for all
here.
that food you brought us from Farmer John up there near Rockford.
Yes, let's give out
indeed.
A lot of vegetables.
yes.
Indeed,
Okay.
indeed.
All right.
All right.
The
Thank
name
you.
of the book is Secrets, the CIA's War
It's
at
still
Home.
available.
Yes.
It's still available. Angus MacKenzie is the author, as edited by his brother and mom.
Thank
Yeah.
you, fellow climate change activist. You are listening to Live from the Heartland, WLUW Chicago 88.7 FM. And we are back. We are back. Thank you for that hot town sun in the city. We have neighbors here and artists. We have Eve Brownstone and David Gista, who are involved in something called Plastic River, a community sculpture building exercise that uses plastic found at the beach. Talk to us about that, and welcome to Live from the Heartland.
Thank you. Good morning. So Plastic River is a project that I was involved into through Eve, who is part of the collective P.O. Box Gallery, and I started to think about it for a while because going on the beach, I live in Rogers Park next to the beach, and I was really
You
pissed.
lucky man.
I was pissed at seeing so much junk and people throwing things like with no concern, no thoughts. And so because I'm an artist and I have a creative mind, I decided to start to think about creating art out of that, making something positive outside of something negative that was happening. Also because, we all concerned today about the situation of our planet. And that's a really big political issue, more than any others, I think, because our life and surviving is at play. So that was my motivation here.
So I want to dive in a little bit more to your artistic process. How do you take disparate, incongruous pieces of wave-washed bits of plastic and turn it into art? Where does art arise out of our garbage?
I sort out things thinking what can I use, but I also I try to kill two birds with one stone, even though I don't like to kill birds, but it's an expression.
This is Save the Plover State.
And so I collect as much as I can that for the first purpose, which is to clean a little bit the beach with my small contribution. And then I sort out.
He's saying beach, by the way.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm French. For us, it's the same.
Yes. Sun on the beach. All right.
So, C6 and son. Sorry.
Come on, let's roll it here.
Okay. Then there is a whole process of sorting out, and after the cleaning, sorting, which takes much longer than the collecting.
Yeah.
And the idea of Plastic River is literally to create a river of plastic going throughout the gallery. I mean, the P.O. Box space, which is a former P.O. Box office that's been converted into a community gallery and an event space. And so
At Glenwood and Farwell.
So I sort out plastic by colors. So it's interesting. So you have colors that you find a lot, like black and white, and colors that you don't find a lot, like purple, which for me it's annoying because I like purple and I like yellow. And
Hands of everybody who likes purple.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're all purple.
Yeah.
Purple rain.
Yes.
So anyway, so that's what I do. And I also collect organic elements like driftwood, feathers, things like that, because I do other pieces that are more like sculptural and less installation, products. And but I like the idea of the plastic as becoming strokes of paint.
Let's get even in this conversation. How did P.O. Box Collective come about? How did a project like this get envisioned
Yeah.
within what else P.O. Box Collective is trying to do?
Salome from P.O. Box Collective approached me to do a photo show. I curate the Photographers of Rogers Park Facebook group, and there are about 1,200 of us. So Salome approached me to do a photo show in June that focuses on climate change. And Plastic River seemed to be a really nice kind of next step.
It flowed out of that project?
Yeah, it did.
When I looked up Plastic River, there were a lot of Plastic River things going on around the country and the
Good.
world, actually. People doing sculptures from plastic.
Yeah,
But not our beach. Yours is the first on our beach.
yeah, but that's there is for instance that the British artist named Tony Cragg, who is pretty famous in Europe, not as famous here, and that started in the late 70s. So it's not a new thing, And he does those amazing pieces out of pieces of plastic, and they're very colorful. That's my main inspiration artistically, aesthetically, because he's really using plastic as paint. It's really what it is. So, for instance, I give you an example. He puts on the floor a lot of those plastic and creates a rainbow, or on the floor, on the wall, a rainbow by grading the color from one to other, and so very simple concept, but you had to think about it. He started that in the 70s and 80s. He became pretty famous. That's my inspiration.
I'm sitting here trying to figure out what got dumped in the lake that turned purple. Milk of magnesia bottles, the closest I can
Right.
come to. But
Well, the reality is Chicago recycling is not working.
Well,
Maybe 19% of the stuff that we recycle actually gets recycled, and
that's a higher figure than I thought.
okay.
Yeah.
Getting better.
And I heard something like 68,000 tons of our garbage is shipped to developing countries last year. So
It's always
Isn't that
amazing to
good?
me how much glass you still find on the beach.
Yeah, I was
mean,
going to say, you're not including any of that beautiful beach glass.
Well,
huh?
I decided not to because
Yeah,
you have
good.
to make a choice. Though I go often to Ukraine, Odessa, Ukraine, where I did some workshop with recycled objects and stuff. And I did a workshop where people basically recreated famous paintings out of junk, and the result was amazing.
Wow.
And they would, among other things, they were using a lot of the glass, the sea glass, which they have a lot. You don't find that much in Chicago for some reason, but you find other things like plastics or toothpicks, straws. Hello.
Hello. Right. What was
Anyway.
Oh, never mind. I was going to go off on, the guy whose name we don't mention. He was talking about straws today. Anyway, David Gista, where are you from in France? Where?
Well, I'm a true Parisian,
Ah, how lovely.
but
Which arrondissement?
the Fifth, the Latin Quarter. I grew up there. I was born in the 14th, which is a nice arrondissement also. But I grew up in the Fifth, and
Now you call Rogers Park your home.
yes,
And-
for the last 15 years I've been living.
So how many trips on the beach did you take to get enough stuff for next weekend sculpture making?
Not enough.
Are you kidding?
I mean, there is a lot of supplies, and it's free supplies for an artist. That's really a treat. But the amount of work for sorting out, and it's a good exercise. Actually, I take it as part of my workout, to keep myself in shape. Bending over and walking in the sand, the sun. I even did that in the rain.
Sure.
It's
Is today a collection day or tomorrow a collection day? Are you
I
doing
don't
more?
remember.
tomorrow we start building.
Oh, tomorrow's the beginning
Yeah,
of
the
yeah,
building.
the
assemblage.
week
Yeah,
of
yeah.
building. The opening reception is the 28th from 4 to 7 at the P.O. Box Collective, 6900 North Glenwood, Farwell and Glenwood.
Thrilling. I like the entire concept.
Yeah, it's a way to say, okay, environment is scary, it's terrifying, but let's make some positive things. I'm kind of an incorrigible optimist.
Very good.
We
And,
need a lot more of that these days.
and I see the glass half full most of the time. So that's my idea of creating beauty out of junk. It's like Picasso that I suggested that the beauty of yesterday, what was ugly yesterday will become the beauty of tomorrow or something like that. So let's make beauty out of junk.
Excellent.
And
Keep going to the gym.
keep going to the gym.
I really want to tip my hat to Salome and Eve, not only for your excellent keeping of the flame for what's now 1,200 photographers in our neighborhood. It's not surprising Rogers Park would have that much creative talent. But the whole P.O. Box Collective idea, to my mind, is something that helps take the place of the void the Heartland left when it disappeared. I mean,
Right.
we're still trying to find those community spaces in the neighborhood. And at least from an artistic, radical art, construction point of view, you guys have done it in a very short period of time, less than 6 months, really, since Salome first called me about this whole idea. So my hat's off to this fruition of really a series of great artistic, community expressive activities that you're all working on.
And it was needed, I think. Art is really the backbone of communities, I think. It really kind of helps things to get together. It's the binder, I would call that.
Well, we have our mile of murals and a lot of other stuff going on, so this is just building on that and
Yeah.
giving us a way to refresh it and keep it going.
Yeah. Totally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today, you guys. See you in the hood. Aight.
Stick around for the group picture afterwards.
On the beach.
You're listening to Live from the Heartland at WLUW 88.7 FM in Chicago. Please like us on Facebook. And we have another little musical interlude.
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. Sorry. That's my little rock and roll
Getting
moment.
into it these days.
I know. Hey, you are listening again to Live from the Heartland, and we are starting the second half of our show with Harvey Moshmann. Harvey is the film producer of Eastland, Chicago's Deadliest Day, which was July 24th, 1915. Welcome to Live from the Heartland, and how is it that you came across this story, the newsreels? How did you wind up making
Because
this
it's a
movie?
secret to most people in Chicago
True
still.
that.
Well, it's not well known, but I wouldn't say it's a secret.
Yeah.
I came across a mention of the Eastland in an obscure book in the 90s when I was a producer at TTW, and we had just launched Chicago Stories. And in 2001, we actually made the first version of this. My partner, Chuck Coppola, and I, same partner as I have on this program.
That's a famous last name.
I've heard of it somewhere before.
But
But
makes good wines, I think.
that's what I'm told. But we were each producer had to make a Chicago Stories chapter, and they asked me what I wanted to do. When I said Eastland disaster, and they said, "What's that?" I knew this was going to be a worthwhile project.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So how did you come across the lost newsreels, or supposedly lost?
Well, Jeff Nichols, a U of I grad student, is the one who actually stumbled across the first newsreel in the Netherlands, of all places.
Perfect.
And then subsequent film was found afterwards. But just to be clear, there were 3 newsreel companies in Chicago in the teens: Mutual, I'm going to forget, Universal, and Tribune Selig. And in any case,
You didn't forget.
they followed the story for months. So there was a ton of newsreel shot. Very little of it survives. I've licensed all that can be found, and it's in the doc. But there was a lot more shot.
Well, it's an amazing tale. Let's just tell people the facts of the happenings of that day.
Okay.
You get to,
I get to do that.
because it's your voice.
The Western
And you
Electric...
know them by heart.
I do know them well. The Western Electric Company was having a picnic, an annual outing, and this was to be in Michigan City, Indiana. And they had chartered 5 boats that day to take what was about 7,000 employees and their families across the lake. The Eastland was the first one to go out. It loaded 2,500, as much as we can tell. Could have been a lot more, but we don't know. 2,500 passengers were on the boat, and before it was untied from the dock, it tipped over. and it killed 844 in about 5 minutes.
My God.
It's called the Blue Collar Titanic.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
our handy 3-word description.
Indeed. Well, it's not incorrect.
So
You
what
have-
happened actually? People, I think back in my memory, there's people rushed to one side for a reason.
That was baloney if you watched the movie.
Okay.
Very good.
I
Thank
couldn't
you.
watch the movie because the password didn't work for me, but
All right.
Nonetheless, yes, the company and the owners put out that rumor that it was the passengers that caused the problem. It was
Incredible.
victim blaming, and no, there's really no evidence that actually ever happened. In fact, there were newspaper reports within a couple days after it that they were packed on too closely to budge. They could not have all gone to one side.
Exactly. You know, I love it when historical documentaries tell us a dozen smaller stories like you did so well in this. For example, the heroine Helen Repa, the story of photographer Jim Fujita, even the young essayist Gretchen Krohn.
Right.
You really weaved a lot in there and taught us a lot. Thank you very much. Talk about discovering those stories and prioritizing them into the script.
Well, there were 7 daily newspapers in Chicago at that time.
Amazing.
And plus all the foreign papers.
Good old days.
And we have the Polish paper, the Czech paper, Scandinavian paper, German paper, and we looked at all those. And there's just, if you go on newspapers.com, you can read all of this stuff.
Wow.
New York Times was there, papers from all over the country and the world, and lots of these little stories. That's where we discovered them. But our favorite is the human frog, and we found that because of J. Bonansinga's book, The Sinking of the Eastland, America's Forgotten Tragedy. And the human frog was this motorcycle mechanic who had a little shop up at Irving and Pulaski, and he heard that the ship had turned over, got on his motorcycle.
And we all know how far that is from...
Yeah, that's a good schlep. In
I mean, really.
1915, yeah. He gets downtown. They want to keep him from diving in the water, but he supposedly cold cocks a cop and jumps in the water, and he ultimately pulls 40 bodies out of the hull. And his name was Reggie Bowles, not Reggie, but Reggie.
Right.
And he went on to be a daredevil, and he was in the World War I as a pilot. But he contracted typhoid and some nasty stuff from being in the river that much.
Wondering about that.
Well, it's masterful, these little stories, because you are legitimately expanding this into a full-length documentary by using these little individual stories off of the documentary pieces that you had left. But as I viewed the film, this struck me as just another pay-to-play kind of Chicago story going way back to the turn of the last century. Am I wrong to jump to that
You are not
conclusion?
wrong. This is, I think that's in our DNA here, problems like this. I mean, there were tons of instances where bodies that were being pulled out of the water were looted by passers-by. In the morgue, this happened. Even in wakes in homes, people would come in apparently like a mourner and end up stealing things. I mean, it was just rampant. Chicago was a pretty lawless town in 1915.
Well, you do not shy away from showing the tawdrier human responses in this film, including cowardly men pulling women down to get themselves to the surface.
Well, you have to understand, okay, it's 1915 and it's the summer, but everybody's wearing wool clothing for the most part because that was the style. So
Right.
if you're underwater, if you're in the water in wool clothing, you're going to sink. It's just very difficult to stay afloat. And when we shot the reenactment scenes in that clothing, I was on scuba underneath helping people not drown.
Dang.
that was part of it. But the other thing is people really didn't know how to swim in 1915.
Right.
It was not part of the culture.
Plus, all these people were immigrants.
Right.
For the most part, these were immigrant workers from Western Electric.
Yeah.
And there was a slew of young single women because they were urged.
They were also expected to be in a beauty parade in Michigan City when they got there, and Western Electric was going to film this as a promotional piece that says, look how wonderful our company is.
Look how good looking our gals are.
Right.
Jeez.
And instead, the newsreels captured Chicago's deadliest day.
How did you manage to end this film with that serene river shot? It kind of felt like an up note. Do you know what I'm saying?
The one in color, the drone shot?
Yeah, the color.
Well,
yeah.
we used a drone.
Well, but I mean, the sense of it is what
You
I'm
and the
asking.
U.S. government.
Well, the shot is of the Reed Murdoch building, which is the only building that still remains.
Which I worked in for
Really?
many years. It
Did
was my
they-
father's office.
Did they tell you what happened there?
No, they didn't. No.
We never. There are pictures, tons of pictures of the outside of that building.
Yeah.
We always wanted to find a picture taken on that day inside that building. We've never
Found it. Mm. It's an amazing building.
Yeah, because they laid out quite a few bodies there before they were all moved to the 2nd Regiment Armory.
People my age will remember it as the traffic court
That's
building.
exactly right.
321 North LaSalle.
Many times did we go there in the old days.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed. What's your next project, sir? Are you telling? You're not talking? That's okay.
I'm going tubing on the Truckee River.
Oh, Truckee. I've been to Truckee.
I've been to Truckee. It's like, it's paradise. Truckee, California.
Up the hill and then down the other side.
I have a travel show on PBS
You
called
do?
Wild Travels,
Oh, man.
and I'm
realize
going
that
back.
was-
You're pretty wild on that, sir.
I took a 2-year break to work on this, so I'm going back to that.
Are you going to stick around for the photo?
Sure.
Good. Indeed. Indeed. Your partner in this, is he really a couple of the family?
I believe they're distantly
Okay.
related.
But he's
yeah.
a Chicagoan.
At heart, yes. He lives in California now, but
Okay.
So to continue the pay-to-play theme and
Okay.
the kind of intense, at least newspaper coverage, even if people couldn't see the newsreels in the movie theaters, did any reforms, any changes in merchant safety come about?
as a matter of
They're an
fact,
interesting sponsor for
Yes.
this documentary, by the way.
that's the Chicago Marine Heritage Society.
Yes.
Thank you for reminding me.
Thank you for bringing that up.
They're the folks who bring the Christmas tree ship to Chicago every year. And this is the 3rd film that they have underwritten exclusively in the last couple of years. The Coast Guard, if you go on the Coast Guard site now, you can see that there are stability tests that are required of all passenger vessels. And that is as a direct result of the Eastland capsizing. In the same way that because of the Iroquois theater fire, all doors open out in the theater, there are stability tests done on passenger vessels now. Keep us safe.
Well, the other thing that points it out as the kind of pay-to-play, et cetera, was the damage control done by these know-nothings, Walter Steele and William Hull, who, because they had money, owned a boat. What to do with it, they had no flipping clue. And they are the people who should have gone to jail for losing 844 lives. But I'm sure they just went on to
Buy
have
another
More
boat.
money.
Yeah.
No, actually, they
Did they suffer anything?
I don't know, other than some embarrassment, but no, nothing financially, and they got out of the steamship business after this.
That's the minimum they could do. Wow. Well, where are people going to be able to see this
Well, I'm
flick?
glad you asked.
Yes.
It will be Thursday night, 8 p.m., Channel 11. And
Channel-
there are several repeats after that. You can go on WTTW.com and see those, but Thursday at 8 is the big one.
Well, I think seriously about the victims who were hardworking immigrant people, a lot of Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans who came here to make a life. And
They were making America great.
indeed, thank you. And thank you for remembering them, Harvey Moshmann. Thank you so much for coming on today and telling us this story.
My pleasure.
You're listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM in Chicago.
Hey, we're back. We're back with more Live from the Heartland. And now we are really honored to bring on 2 wonderful filmmakers, Judith Helfand and Fenell Doremus. And they have made a hot film about a hot day, and we're talking about it on another hot day. Good morning to the 2 of you.
Good morning.
Welcome to Live from the Heartland. Most of us do remember very well the 95 heat wave, but you have put together a very thoughtful and complete picture. How did you, Judith Helfand, you in the film do say that you were inspired by the book written by,
Eric Kleinenberg.
thank you, I have his name, but it wasn't close enough. How did that all come about? You read the book, and what did you?
I read the
Your
book
process.
and I said to myself,
oh my goodness, 739 people died in one hot week in one of the wealthiest, most beautiful cities that I know in the United States. A, how could that happen? And B, how did I not know this? Like, where was I in 1995 that I don't remember this, that it wasn't kind of like imprinted on my head in the way other extreme disasters were. And the combination of those two shocking things, the revelation that an extreme weather event could reveal what it did, which was, in a level of extreme disparity, extreme racism, and the long-term impact of segregation in a week in this horrific way, and help us see that the climate crisis was here and alive and going to hurt, and that I didn't really understand it and know about that moment and that event. It all came together for me to say, oh my goodness, I want to follow this.
That is one of the most striking things about this documentary is your widening of the focus.
Oh, yeah.
Many people would just go to this story and say, climate change, yeah, big climate disaster. But you went deeper, and you included then other disasters. Talk about what you call the slow motion disaster ongoing in communities of poverty all over the U.S. And you did bring up Katrina and other events.
Well, we were only going to focus on the heat wave, and on some level, it really could be enough, right? That story right there tells a very, very deep story about the underlying impact of racism and what it does over time, and the fact that that is slow violence. And that's a term, we didn't coin that. Slow motion disaster is something that Eric Kleinenberg coined.
Right.
And slow violence is a term that Rob Nixon, who's an amazing historian and a great thinker at UW-Madison, he termed that to look at the slow violence of poverty and racism meeting the climate crisis, and that the kind of deaths that we see in an extreme weather event is just the hastening and making very, 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 very fast and very, very, very visual something that's happening every single day. Now, right now in Chicago, we have another number that we could point to, and another statistic, and that is that, there's the life expectancy gap between people who live on the north side of town and people who live on the south side of town is about 30 years. Now, when we were making this movie and we were spending time with Dr. Whitman, Steve Whitman, who was the chief epidemiologist in 1995 and then went on to lead the Sinai Urban Health Institute, he took the heat death poverty numbers, he took the heat deaths, he plotted it on a map, he overlaid it with extreme poverty, he got a map that showed where people would die early and too early anyway. Right? And that was just in 1995. He then continued to do that work with the Sinai Urban Health Institute, and then was able to kind of look to see who is living and who is dying of untreatable diseases. Where is the most death by the long-term impact of racism going on every single day, and where is it not? And at the time when we interviewed him for the movie, that lifespan differential was 15 years, and now it's 30.
It's incredible.
So
it's incredible.
So in a way, I mean, that's the slow motion. That's the slow motion disaster speeding up.
Yeah. Fenell. Thank you. Fenell Doremus, how did you get involved with this project with Judith?
Well, I was very familiar with Judith's work and admired her past projects. And so she found me through Cartemquin Films when she was coming to Chicago to do some filming. And we had maybe an hour-long conversation about her premise of the film, and I was just completely hooked. I actually lived through the heat wave in 1995, and so I'm embarrassed to say 13 years later, when we talked, I didn't know the number was 739 who had died. I knew it was a lot, but I didn't know it was that big, and I didn't know why we as Chicagoans didn't have that number, as she said, seared into our brains.
Yeah, well, the other guy who didn't know was Richard M. Daley, who comes off looking pretty sad.
I remember when we first learned about it, we had a customer at the Heartland named Peter Donahue, whose brother was the medical examiner, and he clued us in how many people had died. That's when we first heard about it.
Which was right at the start.
Yeah, and I did have a question about, you have footage of preparation for disaster relief by various agencies, and you end up talking to a heavy hitter, a guy who probably is a general or something, and you're basically saying,
was great, by
why
the
don't
way.
we put more money into prevention and to taking care of racism and dealing with poverty? And he just said, well, that's not the way it works, but if you figure out a way, basically, I might be in line. What was your interaction with that fellow? How did you get that close to those people?
Well, we met General Heltzel when we went to a disaster preparedness conference in Paducah, Kentucky, and that was a one-day conference dedicated to bringing people all around Kentucky in, sort of to look at disaster preparedness.
For like an earthquake.
For the likelihood of an earthquake on the Madrid Fault. Right?
Exactly,
Last
exactly.
one was like 1912 or something.
1812.
Up close.
But they're all sort of meeting for the big one. And I think that I was just, I was so impressed by when and how we use the term emergency or disaster or preparedness. And I thought, wow, what if we were able to take that same level of urgency, that same level of compassion, these amazing resources, this incredible infrastructure which exists county by county, city by city, state by state, everywhere, and we actually then said, hey, let's look at the slow motion public health disaster in the same way, and not necessarily bring in the National Guard, but what if we really invested in the needs of community schools, and we let the community really determine what they need and how they need it in order to ensure the kind of social cohesion that actually determines who lives and dies on the day of a disaster.
And jobs. I know Dr. Linda Murray, she talked about there's just no jobs.
Absolutely.
No steel workers in this neighborhood.
So I think it's doctors like those at Sinai and children at Lurie Children's who have tried to redefine the gun violence epidemic as a public health issue. I'm intrigued that in our conversation so far this morning, I'm not hearing about global warming or climate change. You're calling it about climate crisis. And it seems to me that is the more kind of language we ought to be using.
More urgent than
and maybe it won't be as slow rolling a crisis if we actually called it that and responded the way that you're discussing. Have you seen changes since you got into telling this story since 95?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I wasn't telling the story in 95 for sure. But yes, I mean, in terms of language, I think there's a lot of linguistic changes that people are starting to make. And you hope that the action, it unlocks the action, right? So just a few weeks ago in June, the county of Milwaukee and the city of Milwaukee officially declared racism a public health crisis.
No kidding. I missed that. When did...
Well, I hope that'll mean something.
Oh, that's
changes
huge
in the
for
vote up
Milwaukee.
there.
Are you kidding?
No, we're not.
Milwaukee is almost as bad as Chicago in racism. Almost.
Actually, I mean, from the reports that we read when we read that story, they said that it was the most segregated city in the United States. And the reason why they're trying to sort of call it a public health crisis is because once you change the language, then perhaps, and you change the frame, then you could actually utilize resources and utilize empathy and actually change who is at the table in a different way. So that was something that we were very interested in. The Guardian just made a formal change, and they said that all of their reporters who are reporting on climate change now have to call it climate crisis, climate emergency. What were some of the other terms?
They won't use the term they're saying climate science deniers instead of climate skeptics or climate change skeptics.
Climate
They don't use
science
skeptics
deniers.
anymore. They outright call them deniers. Yeah.
As opposed to calling them morons. Sorry.
So what we do, and then one of the things that we do in the movie is we actually reframe grassroots organizations, community-based organizations that are working to change and address the root causes of structural racism and rebuild the South Side and the West Side with a vision that is based on the understanding and the needs of the community by the community and for the community. We reframe a lot of that work as a new brand of first responders with the hopes that if we can do that, then maybe the disaster preparedness infrastructure and disaster recovery and the folks that are working at the city level and the state level could really look at and value and invest in that extraordinary work, which I really can say is a renaissance that is taking place on the south and west sides of the city.
Indeed.
So where is this film being seen, and how do you market a film like this, even in the middle of a heat wave like we're having now? Good timing, by the way, but how do you market this kind of a film given its topic?
Well, we're playing, first of all, we're going into our second week at the Gene Siskel Film Center. We're there until the 25th. We have panels, 4 of, I think, the 5 nights that we have left. Really interesting, amazing panel discussions where we're trying to highlight some of these community organizers that Judith mentioned, along with, environmental justice practitioners, public health officials. Tonight we actually have some City of Chicago officials coming in, and from Cook County we have.
It's going to be like a little mini town hall.
That's great. How has it been to show your film and have that kind of interaction afterwards?
It's been amazing. After the lights come up, we don't launch right into the panel. We actually take a minute to sort of feel the room.
Mm-hmm. Good
As
idea.
Judith says, get the temperature of the room, unintended. And, have people just sort of like shout out their feelings. And, in Chicago, it has been raw. People are mad and angry at the end of the film and fired up. And, what's been great about these panel discussions is that all of these people who are coming up and sitting on the stage who are working in these communities every day to make change.
Or working at the city level, we'll find out
Or
tonight.
working at the city level.
Yeah.
They really, are bringing that audience back into a place of, we can do this. These are the steps, these are the policies that need to change, these are the ways in which we need to,
Excellent. Fenell, Doremus, Judith, Helfand, your film is Cooked, Survival by Zip Code. If you survived 95, you were in the right part of town to do so. And please understand that you are privileged to have that happen to you. It's showing at Siskel. What time tonight?
7 tonight?
7 tonight?
7:30? 7 or
And there's
so-
and there's a discussion afterwards.
And tonight we have Dr. Terry Mason, who's from
good.
Cook County. We have Allison Arwadi, the acting commissioner of the Department of Public Health. Ranjani Prabhakar, deputy policy director of climate change at the city. And Alma Anaya, Cook County Commissioner of the 7th District.
And
so it's a great panel
And the
tonight.
moderator is extraordinary.
Alden Lowry from WBZ.
Dang,
so
girls.
tonight's going to be a great.
Please join us.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Please
joining
come,
us
people,
this
come.
morning. You
All
got to
right.
see this.
We want to thank everybody who came on the show. Jim MacKenzie, our buddy and climate activist. Eve Brownstone and David Gista on Plastic River. Harvey Moshmann on the great film Eastland, Chicago's Deadliest Day. And another wonderful film, Judith Helfand and Fenell Doremus on Cook, Survival by Zip Code. Next week, we got a whole bunch of old radicals coming in talking about rising up angry at 50 years. We want to thank everybody who makes this show possible. Keep doing good in the world because the world needs all the good that we do. All power to the people.
Woo! I love that.
Dang, girl. Excellent work.